Shabbat Shalom again, and Bruchim Habaim, welcome. When the three Torahs came out of the Ark, I feel like I warned you there'd be a lot going on this morning, and there certainly is. So I did think for a couple minutes about skipping my sermon, but just for a couple minutes. And then this is what I planned for. But also my heart, like yours, is both aching and in need of some soothing, as it were. And so I'm speaking from there. And it has to do with what I have been hearing and what I have been reading. And sadly, it has to do with darkness and despair. I'm not going to speak about that and end my comments there because my heart will never give up on optimism and hope. I will do my best, however, to find some light and some joy, and perhaps to look for a recommendation and a strategy together to face what we need to face. So most of you do pay attention to the news and you read the newspapers. You know what's going on in the world. And this is what I'm hearing from people about their sense of despair and sadness about what's going on. It has to do with Omicron and new strains of the virus. It has to do with the possible repeal of Roe versus Wade and the implications for women's reproductive rights and self-determination, the implications for poor women and victims of rape. It has to do with the emergence of a Supreme Court that's driven by politics or fundamental religious perspectives. It has to do with the fact that Iran has become a threshold nuclear state after we were let out of a nuclear deal, and now rumblings of preemptive strikes and the unthinkable as to what could follow. It has to do with the growth of authoritarianism throughout the world and the disregard for democratic institutions, processes, and principles. It has to do with our kids, with our children who continue to be slaughtered in our schools, and the violence on our streets. It has to do with the fears of inflation and the subsequent economic challenges. It has to do with homelessness and hunger, immigration and border issues, environmental disasters, which perhaps could be the most nightmarish of them all. And then a government which is held hostage by partisans, many of whom are serving in the government but claim to want the destruction of the very government they serve. It's a lot to hold on to. What kind of a world are we in, and what kind of a world will we leave our children? So I felt compelled to mention this after numerous conversations in the past week and a half with many of you who are sharing your fears and feeling the darkness. But I truly believe that if religion cannot be a source of solace and a place of hope and light, then we have to think or rethink what we do here. This is Hanukkah. And you see and you know that it comes at the darkest time of the year. And we need to know it, and we need to know why, because of the lessons that it teaches. You can almost assume that Hanukkah, in its origins, that the Maccabees didn't win their victory at the end of December. The juxtaposition of Hanukkah, Rosh Chodesh, and Shabbat informs us about a lot. You know, and I know, there is a natural fear of darkness. How many nights did I put my own kids to bed when they were little and they said, make sure you put on the nightlight, or leave the bathroom door open with the light on, or leave a light on in the hallway. It's natural because darkness literally evokes fear. And darkness is both a physical reality and a metaphor for danger. Hanukkah is our festival of lights. Some of the great Torah commentators would object to me saying this, But Hanukkah is not just a lesson about history and what we learn from the past. Hanukkah has elements that are rooted in the world of nature, the natural world, and the lessons we learn from it. And perhaps it is from nature that our deepest learning can take place. These are the darkest days. We're experiencing the longest nights. And I have no doubt that as we uncover natural meanings, we'll find certain lessons that bring comfort and hope. In the Haftarah, the prophet Zechariah clearly teaches us, Lo b'chayil v'lo b'koach ki im beruchi amar Adonai. It's not by might or by power, but my spirit, says God. Sure, we know there is a story of power, a story of a military victory, a story of renewed Jewish power in the ancient world. But we also know there is something more important. And I believe that we will emerge from these days also with a renewed spirit. It is often from the darkest of places that we find hope and that great change takes place. And this is what the tradition asks of us and demands of us. That is an attribute we can never lose, the attribute of hope. After the Maccabean victory, it was not military might that enabled our survival. And the reason is, and we know this from historians, the Maccabeans gave rise to the Hasmonean dynasty, the Hashmonaim. They were men of power and strength who ultimately fell because of their corruption, the corruption that came with their power. And yet, in spite of their failure, in spite of the destruction, in spite of our exile, we remained alive because of our faith, because we had a source for our values and our understanding, not just for us, but we gave it to the world. And so when we read the Mishnah that was written down 200 years after the destruction, we read nothing about the Maccabees at all. We just read about a miracle of light, a light that was lit on the darkest day. So literally and figuratively, we can all agree these are dark days. If you're outside last night, you may have barely seen the moon if you did at all. And tonight you'll just see a tiny sliver. The days are the shortest that they will be in the year. So what do? What do we do with all this darkness? We light lights. As the old adage goes, it's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. And the Rabbi saw something primordial in the lights of the season. Let me share a couple wonderful midrashim. There's a great little midrash that after Adam was created, and you know he was created on the sixth day, he was observing the world around him, and he saw that the sun was beginning to disappear. It was going away. And Adam was greatly fearful about the darkness. So God provided Adam with 2 stones of flint. And then the next day, Shabbat came, and it was light again. And then it began to get dark again. And as it got dark, he rubbed those 2 flint stones together, and he did Havdalah. He found the light of God in the darkness, and he realized that he had the power to create fire. And that was the first Havdalah. So God creates light, and he creates darkness. We too can create light in darkness. There's another teaching. When Adam saw the daylight hours were becoming shorter and shorter, he was fearful, and he thought he must have done something wrong because God is now punishing him. The world is becoming dark all around him, and the world he thought would be returning to chaos. He declared darkness to be the death sentence imposed upon him by heaven. He thought he did something very wrong, and so he sat for 8 days fasting and in prayer. And then came the winter solstice, and he saw that the days were now becoming longer and longer. And what he said was the following: this is the way of the world. There is darkness and there is light. He internalized the cycles of nature. Just like we recite in that first bracha after Baruch Hu, Yotzer Or Uvarei Choshech. God creates light and darkness. Perhaps even in the cycles of history and the cycles of humanity. We know there's darkness, but we have to believe that the darkness will be followed by light, and then can assume there will be darkness again. The rabbis were describing an unknown 8-day festival of light, smack in the darkest part of winter, celebrating the return of light to the world. And they're teaching something else, because by connecting the darkness and the light, not just to the Maccabees, but to nature, they're saying that there's going to be darkness again and again, and that is natural. But it's the metaphor for the fact that there will be light again and again, which teaches us that life is not perfect, and that we have to learn how to live in an imperfect world, and we have to do what we can litakein olam, to correct it. We know though that light, be it candlelight or fire, we know that humanity has given meaning to it, the meaning of hope and knowledge, of learning and insight. Torah, Orah, as I said, the Torah is light. And so lighting candles is what we do. Not just to see, but also to inspire. The great Hungarian poet and freedom fighter Hannah Senesh once wrote the following. It had to do with people who came before her. Because when she looked up into the sky, she knew enough to know that many of those stars that we see, they no longer exist. Being light years away, they may have burned out thousands of years ago, but their light reaches us nevertheless. And she compares those stars to people, peoples whose light continue to shine upon us long after they have lived. It is memory that inspires also. What I know is that you have a light inside of you. I know that. Your light is a source of strength and understanding and hope. And you'll always need to draw upon it and to share it with others. Think about this. Think about the people in your life who lived through such extraordinary hardship, whose lives were upended and they left one continent and came to another. And they worked so hard to create a world just like this where we sit. And they survived. Think about this, the great difficulties and challenges that you had in front of you during your lives, and how you have been able to overcome them. Earlier, before services began, I mentioned former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. Gabby was shot by a crazy lunatic outside of a shopping plaza where there was a rally against guns. She was shot in the head. She could no longer serve in Congress. She lost her speech and much of her ability to move, but she's gone through years of rehab. Just last week, Parashat Miketz, Gabby Gifford, Gabriella, whose name means God is my hero, had a bat mitzvah. Yesterday, I gave a message to the congregation in the weekly email that goes out about Aaron Applebaum. Aaron Applebaum sat in about 5 rows right around where Ed is sitting right now for 30 years here in the sanctuary. He died this week and he was buried. Aaron was from a small town in Poland, Frischtik it's called. The Nazis liquidated the town and brought those unable to work, they brought them to death camps. And those who they saw as being strong enough, like the kids, the young teenagers who could work, they brought them to Plaszow, a work camp. Well, Aaron was 14 and he was strong, and he went by bus to Plaszow. It's very close to Auschwitz. The day he was brought to the work camp, the Nazis brought too many people there, and they had to process each individual carefully, and so they sent him and a group of others back on the bus to go back to Frischtik, telling them the next day the bus would meet them in the middle of the town and bring them back to this work camp. Well, Aaron wouldn't have any of it. And so once back in the town, he took off into the woods. Aaron Applebaum, Zichrono Livracha, spent 4 years in the woods, hiding and fighting and running and hiding and helping people and fighting. The war was over. He saw his share of bloodshed and death and freezing conditions and hunger. He spent a couple years in the DP camps, and then he landed in Brooklyn, New York. He met his wife. He raised 3 children. He worked very, very hard. He never lost his faith. He was grateful for everything he had. What gave him that strength? He had a fire in him. He had a fire that wouldn't accept despair. He had a fire in him that would never give up. And he kept it burning. And it gave him so much strength. And during the darkest times, he didn't stop fighting. He didn't stop working. He didn't stop loving. We look around in our world now, and as I begin, we see how challenging things are. But we have to look within ourselves and understand the gifts and the inner resources and not give in to the darkness. We cannot give in to the darkness. And this is where faith is so important. Adonai Ori Vishi, we say, God is my light and God is my help. We say those words from the beginning of Elul until the end of our holy days. It's a choice to say those words. And when you say those words and repeat those words, you begin to internalize those words. We light the candles on Hanukkah and we experience their holiness, and we know they're meant to give us hope. Those lights are a mark of a celebration of Jewish survival. And we will never let the lights go out. And so we see that our faith may help create hope, but it also enables us and inspires us to act. That's what this wonderful Aaron Applebaum did for me. With all of his power and the tragedy in his history, he retained a sparkle in his eyes, a beautiful face that belied his internal drive and his strength. And perhaps it's our ability to not allow ourselves to be victimized by evildoers, but to join in the fight that's out there. It's a fight for justice and freedom, and join it with a sense of what's in here, the force that we won't give up. So we can bring each other support and help. And we do it when we light together, when we sing about the light together, and we do it mostly with our warmth, our kindness, and the values we hold dear. These days are difficult. There is a darkness, but I assure you, there will be light again. The light will shine again. It has to. So besides hope and faith, I do want to tell you there's something else. What I want to tell you is there's a need for laughter. We need to laugh because laughter opens up our hearts and our souls. And we need to remember this midrash of Adam and the first Hanukkah of nature, because there's fear and uncertainty, but morning comes and light returns. Perhaps we need to be reminded that the stones of flint are not in God's hands, they're in our hands. Maybe as we are in the darkest day of the year, like the moon, which we could be assured is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger for the next 15 days as we go into the month of Tevet. We will experience its light, and we will let it inspire us to hold on to our hope. Morning will come. There will be light. There will be more brightness. There is reason to hope. Shabbat Shalom, Chodesh Tov, Hanukkah Sameach. Keep coming back so we can keep singing, smiling, and laughing together. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.